In this video, we'll answer why China is sending surveillance balloons over the US, what their actual strategy is, and most importantly, why you're going to see a lot more balloons in the future. As it stands, there was one confirmed balloon and 3 other objects shot down in these places. The original balloon was 200 feet tall and had a payload the size of a regional jet airliner, similarly to the civilian balloon 追云号, or Cloud Chaser, launched in 2019. But to understand why China is doing this, we need to understand the U-2 incident.
On display in Moscow, what's alleged to be the wreckage of the U-2 spy plane.
Global superpowers spy on each other's militaries in order to gain a leg up in the event of a conflict. In 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over 1,000 miles deep into Soviet airspace. Initially, American authorities claimed it was a NASA-operated weather research aircraft. But the Soviets caught the US in that lie by producing the captured pilot, Gary Powers. In short, this led to US-USSR relations souring, which in turn led to US ICBMs in Turkey, leading to Soviet ICBMs in Cuba, thus beginning the Cuban Missile Crisis, the most dangerous period of the Cold War. Now back to 2023. A Chinese balloon is found over US airspace. China claims it's a lost weather balloon. The United States says the equipment on it is not for weather, but for spying, and so shoots it down. You can see some clear parallels between these two stories. But was doing a bit of spying worth the risk of escalation? Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken cancels his scheduled visit to China in response. But why did China decide to sour relations? The Chinese ambassador to France cited recent American military base expansion in the Philippines and arms sales to Taiwan as direct reasons for why Blinken shouldn't have even visited China in the first place. It seems as though China is retaliating for what it sees as American escalation in the Asia-Pacific. However, this is only the surface-level explanation, and this links to the second part of our story. This is all a greater strategy by China. The US military played naive at the beginning of the incident, when in reality, it has been studying Chinese spy balloons for years. In 2020, Japan spotted an aerial orb over their territory, which in hindsight, Japanese officials have identified as a Chinese spy balloon. Additionally, there were already 3 separate confirmed balloon incursions in US airspace during the Trump administration. These were immediately classified as UFOs. As a result of this, the US is investigating over 300 previous UFO incidents, many of which could have been Chinese spy balloons. How did NORAD even let this happen? They can track Santa Claus, but can't find spy equipment in American airspace? Remember, this balloon is the size of a building. Shouldn't the US have just shot down the balloon earlier? Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said that the US turned the tables on China and collected data about the behavior and trajectory of the balloon. The Pentagon may have just been doing damage control. When the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin attempted to call his Chinese counterpart, they didn't even pick up the phone. It looks like China is trying to embarrass the US and make them look foolish. In a perfect example of the irony of the US military, they sent an $80 million jet to pop a simple balloon. And the only real countermeasures that the US has taken are sanctions against a couple of Chinese balloon-related companies. While the US is leveling sanctions, the People's Liberation Army has been talking about the, quote, near-space battleground. This is the Chinese strategy. They're building more balloons. But wait, let's recap what we know. The US and the Soviet Union had an aerial espionage history as part of the Cold War. And now China and the US seem to be at least partially following that path. The Chinese claim the balloon was a weather balloon, but the US says it was a spy balloon. As China-US tensions increase, both countries seem to be testing the waters and retaliating for what they see as escalations. These balloons appear to have some stealth capabilities and have even evaded NORAD and the US military. The main newspaper of the Chinese military published an article in 2020 describing how near space has become a new battleground in modern warfare. Balloons are a powerful eye in the sky for covering low altitude and surface targets. essentially a low-altitude stealth satellite that can better observe the Earth. Balloons can drift with wind patterns, making them difficult to track. Unlike the predictable orbit of satellites, they can evade radar due to the relatively low altitude and can be steered to hover over a single area to observe it over time. They're way cheaper and easier than rocket launches, and even hover low enough to capture mobile phone signals that don't reach space. Luis Elizondo, former head of the Pentagon UFO program, stated that what's happening now is you have low-end technology being used to harass America. It is a high-impact, low-cost way for China to do this, and the more you look up in the sky, the more you will see. China knows all this. Their army even stated in 2021 that, in the future, balloon platforms may also be as frightening and hidden killers as submarines in the deep sea. The architect of this strategy appears to be the scientist Wu Zhe. He built a 330-foot-long, high-altitude balloon called Cloud Chaser that we previously mentioned that circumnavigated the globe in 2019, including over parts of the US. At first, Wu's vision seems civilian in nature. His plan involves thousands of high-atmosphere balloons, like a cheap Starlink, with the goal of tracking pollution, weather, and most notably, conducting surveillance. This detail, along with Wu's background in stealth materials and jet fighters, potentially shows his vision's true nature. He won prizes from the Chinese military. He even sat on the advisory commission for a general armaments department. These balloons have already flown over more than 40 countries and across 5 continents, according to the Biden administration. The US government also argues that the balloon we saw a few weeks ago is part of a vast surveillance program directed by the Chinese military. Balloons seem innocent at first, but this could be the beginning of a bubbling conflict, with near space as the stage. For a closer analysis on those 300 US airspace incursions we mentioned before, we recommend this Johnny Harris video, especially if you watch it with all this extra context we've just given. It excellently highlights this new era of airspace investigations.
Weird. The military report from that day says that they noticed, quote, multiple objects descending from around 60,000 feet down to 50 feet in a matter of seconds.